If you've been watching this channel for the past few weeks, you know that I've started a new project of working my way through the comic books or the graphic novels in my school library for a couple of reasons. One is I'm trying to get my students to read more in English, and I want to familiarize myself with the graphic novels in the school library so that I can better guide my students. But that's kind of just an excuse. I also am enjoying getting back into comic books, something I enjoyed in my youth, have not read in many years, and am enjoying getting back into it. Today, we've got some Tintin here, and I'm going to do a little bit of a preamble rambling here about Tintin because I want to give my baseline for this going in, and I'd be curious to hear what other people's baseline is because I think this might vary widely depending on geography and age. But for me, as an American growing up in the 1980s and early 90s, I did not read Tintin at all. In fact, as a kid, I don't think I even knew who he was. Somewhere along the line, I guess maybe high school or maybe even college, I started catching references to him. You know, I think The Simpsons referenced him at one point. There was an episode, there was some sort of episode in the 90s where they made a reference to Bart's Tintin collection as kind of a joke. Uh, I yeah, I at some point through cultural references, I gradually became aware of him, but I really didn't have a good idea of who he was. I think until I was in college, um, and did not see, to the best of my recollection, did not ever see his comic books in stores. Now, I think that's my experience as an American. I think if I had grown up in Europe, obviously, Tintin would have been much more popular. But also, if I had been British, I think the British, in, by virtue of their proximity to Europe, and yeah, I know Britain is technically part of Europe, but whatever. Because of their proximity to Europe, get a lot more exposure to that. So I think, and then who knows? Maybe the countries that still have close ties to Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, uh, are more influenced by Britain than the U.S. is. So you know, if you're from any of those countries, let me know what your experience with Tintin is. I also think maybe it might be generational because Steven Spielberg was obviously influenced by Tintin, right? He released that Tintin movie about 10 years ago. So maybe in Steven Spielberg's generation, these Tintin comic books were more widely available in the U.S. Um, but you know, it could also be. Sometimes I make sweeping generalizations about my own experience, and it turns out just to be my own experience. You know, it could be if I was in a different town or something, there would have been more Tintin books, or maybe I just went to the wrong bookstores or hung out with the wrong crowd at school. So yeah, I'd be curious with everyone else's experience. But yeah, I eventually, just through cultural osmosis, became aware of Tintin as a famous Belgian hero who was popular in translation in English. Uh, when the Spielberg movie came out in 2011, I never actually saw that movie. When I lived in Cambodia, I bought a DVD of it and tried to watch it, but it didn't suck me in. I think maybe I had a bad copy of the DVD that the animation wasn't, the colors weren't great on my copy. But I did watch the making of featurette or some of the introductions to that, where Spielberg was talking about his love for the characters. Uh, and I became aware that Tintin was associated in many people's minds with the sort of 1930s era pulp adventure, which of course Spielberg is a big fan of. The Indiana Jones is based off of that same genre. And I also, although there are huge gaps in my knowledge, I consider myself a fan of that time period and that genre, even though it's obviously problematic nowadays for a number of reasons. We'll get into maybe more of that later. There are some of these Tintin books that can't even be reprinted nowadays. Via Wikipedia is where I'm getting my knowledge on this. But yeah, became aware that Tintin was associated with this kind of adventure genre. I also, for anyone new to this channel, I have been living in Southeast Asia for the past several years now. First Cambodia and now Vietnam. And we will often see Tintin merchandise in the tourist areas. Sorry, I think I'm gonna have to stop this video momentarily. The baby's crying. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. So, anyways, these tourist areas in Vietnam and Cambodia, the place where they're selling tourist souvenirs, there will often be Tintin themed stuff, like T-shirts or plaques or something like that, that will have Tintin on a cyclo, little Vietnamese bicycle, where there's a seat for someone to sit in, wearing a Vietnamese hat, and with a title like Tintin in Indochina. Um, and people see that and they think, oh, right, Tintin. He must have had adventures in Indochina in one of the books. I mean, it makes sense, right? The books are francophone. I mean, they're Belgium, but in the French language and in the French orbit, right? And Indochina during the 1930s was part of the French empire. So it's a kind of adventure you would imagine Tintin having during his adventures to all the different corners of the world, except I looked it up on Wikipedia, and Tintin actually never went to Indochina, as far as I can tell. I mean, you can see here in the various titles they've got pictured here. It's something that they just made up for the tourists, but it's trading on his image of somebody who goes to exotic places in the 1930s world, and that just kind of intrigued me. So, uh, all that being said, though, I would have been content to remain vaguely intrigued by it. I didn't feel an overwhelming urge to actually read the comic books, just vaguely curious. But my school library has a big collection of them. I'm not sure if they have all of them, but it has like 20 of them. There are, I believe, 24 in the complete collection, although book number 2, Tintin in the Congo, is, I think, permanently out of print for reasons of racism. Um, but yeah, okay. Aside from that, there are 23 books. My school seems to have about 20 of them in the school library. And it's an Australian school, although the faculty is international. So I can easily imagine somebody, a former teacher who may have been there a few years before me, may have been British, or from a country where Tintin was more popular, and they decided to order a bunch of the Tintin books. As far as I can tell, the students, Vietnamese students, don't seem to have much interest in them. They just sit on the shelves largely unread, as far as I can tell. But I thought, since I'm making this project of working my way through the graphic novels, comic books in my school, why not? Why not? In my 40s, time to discover these children's comics from the 1930s, Tintin. So I picked this book up more or less at random. It just looked like it might be a fun place to start. Uh, and checked it out and was reading through it and noticed a number of things right off the bat. There's Tintin's sea captain friend. What is his name? Captain Haddock or something like that, right? I don't remember the name. Is living the life of a rich country gentleman. Now, as I said, I don't know much about Tintin at all. But even through the little I know this guy is not supposed to be a rich country gentleman. He's supposed to be some sort of sea dog. But in one of the previous stories, he's come into money somehow or another, and now is putting on airs of being a rich man with monocles. So that's something that must have happened in a previous story that I didn't know about. And then as you keep reading, there are other references to previous stories. They talk about a general that they remember from a previous story here. And I started to realize as I was reading through this, I had just assumed Tintin was like, those Uncle Scrooge comic books. Each one was a different adventure and you could just pick up any one. But it appears that there is kind of a continuity that's established by this point. Now, I went to Wikipedia, and this one is one of the later ones. This one is book number 13 from 1943. So I decided, since my school library seems to have a bunch of these books, and since nobody else seems to be reading them, why not put this one on hold, come back to it later, and read them chronologically. I've got the list here from Wikipedia. Like I said, not all of these seem to be in print nowadays because of reasons of racism or something like that. And I'm not even sure my school has all the ones that are in print, but it has most of them. So the first one is, let's see, can you read this? Tintin in the Land of the Soviets, published in 1929-1930. And my school had that one. So that's what we're starting with. That's today's review. Now, you may notice, just comparing these two books here, quite a difference in not only the animation style, but obviously the colors. This one has colors. This one has black and white. Sorry, I'm going to have to take another break. The baby's crying again. Okay, I'm back. It's one of those nights. Anyways, you can see that this animation style is not only not colorized, but much more primitive. So it turns out that this represents this Tintin in his very early and rough stages before it gets later refined. There is, if you go to Wikipedia, there's a surprising amount of information on these Tintin comics. And I say surprising because, I figured there would be a Wikipedia article on Tintin, right? He's famous enough. But actually, for each of these adventures, there's a pretty sizable Wikipedia article on each of them where it talks about, the production of them, the reception, the criticism, the influences for like each separate story. So, I didn't think there would be that much literature on these Tintin comics. But the Wikipedia articles were interesting, and I'm relying primarily on the Wikipedia article here for Tintin in the Land of the Soviets. for which I apologize for relying on Wikipedia. Actually, I take that back. I don't apologize. I'm not a professor. I'm not doing research. Wikipedia is, I mean, what else am I going to do, right? Wikipedia is where people go for knowledge these days, and Wikipedia is accurate more often than it's not. Anyways, this was published in 1929, 1930, for a Belgian newspaper called some French name. I'm not going to mispronounce that. And according to Wikipedia, it was a very conservative Catholic magazine. And I guess if you know your history, in the 1930s, the far-right Catholic was very closely associated with the fascist movement. The wording of the Wikipedia article, it makes it sound like the newspaper even called itself fascist. I don't know. So they make a big deal about, in the Wikipedia article, how this comic is blatantly anti-Soviet propaganda because it comes from a far-right Catholic source, where I guess the author Hergé was working and influenced at the time. Although, I mean, by 1929, 1930, the Soviet Union was not a workers' paradise, right? So I'm willing to forgive a lot of the anti-Bolshevik stereotyping in here because the Communist Party in the 1930s in the Soviet Union was legitimately not good, right? I mean, the cartoonish stuff, of course, is cartoonish, but they were legitimately doing a lot of the terrible things that are being portrayed in this cartoon, like rounding up people for political crimes or expropriating grain. I mean, as luck would have it, I've been listening to Mike Duncan's Revolutions podcast, and just this past couple weeks, he's done his wrap up on the Russian Revolution and the Soviet Union in the 1930s under Stalin, and it does not sound like it was a nice place. Besides which, you don't need to be extremely right-wing to be anti-Soviet, right? I mean, I'm thinking of the Rocky and Bullwinkle cartoons in the United States, which was considered just mainstream politics at the time. But yeah, the Wikipedia article makes a big deal about how the conservative, far-right Catholic bent of the newspaper influenced the very anti-Soviet tone of this comic. Something else I learned from Wikipedia. Apparently, these speech balloons were a new thing at the time. They had been appearing in comics in the U.S. The author Hergé found out about it from somebody had sent him U.S. comics from Mexico, and he was impressed by the speech balloons here. So he incorporated into that. The Wikipedia article said that when these comics were republished in France, they tried to do away with the speech balloons and just add boxes explaining things going on at the bottom of the panel, which I guess is what the readers of the time were more used to. So that's a little interesting, a little bit of comic book history there, I guess. But anyways, where was I? In this comic, Tintin is a reporter for the Petite 20, 20 in France, in French, which is the newspaper that was publishing these cartoons. And they were published in the newspaper, kind of like as little supplements. It's not quite clear from this reprint how it was serialized in the newspaper. I guess, and I'm literally just putting this together as I'm filming this now, as I'm talking. Whenever you see Hergé's name in a panel, maybe that may have been the end of a series. So maybe it was, that appears to be a 2-page spread every time. Anyways, Tintin, in the conceit of this is, he works for the paper. He's a reporter for the paper. Oh, I always assumed that Tintin was like a boy. But here he's being portrayed as a reporter with a job. I think in the other one I checked out, he was also being portrayed as somebody who was working and also drinking alcohol. So I guess somebody who is of age. Although, I mean, who knows? Those Europeans, right? He looks like he's a boy, right? But I guess maybe he's a young man. Anyways, sorry I'm rambling. His assignment is to go to the Soviet Union to take pictures and write a report. As soon as he sets foot on the train, there's a communist who does not want him to report the truth, and so blows up the train. So that's just, 2 pages in. And that sets the tone right then for what is some spectacularly bizarre adventures, where every 2 pages there's just something that just completely defies the laws of physics, or is just completely ridiculous. I mean, it's like watching a cartoon. I guess comic strips are kind of like cartoons in a way, aren't they? But it reminds me of the cartoons from this era. The 1920s, early 1930s cartoons, where there wasn't really much of a plot to them. It was just like a series of gags, and which are not terribly interesting by today's standards. I mean, interesting for historical value. Those are old cartoons, but definitely have different sensibilities than today's entertainment. And that's the vibe I get here. To be perfectly honest, I did not particularly enjoy reading this. I mean, I can't really complain because, as you can see, these are big spreads with relatively little words for each spread. It's a bit of a hefty book, as graphic novels go, 141 pages, but each individual page is just very big panels. So something that you are able to read very quickly, but just something that does not grab you and draw you in. Something that seems to be pushing you away as much as possible. Like you're just reading this, and it's just so disconnected that you can't possibly get absorbed in this story. So, I said at the beginning of this video that this project to read through the graphic novels in my library, I was viewing as kind of like a little bit of a guilty pleasure. But sometimes a comic book that's very juvenile and what's the word? Not particularly well thought through can be a bore, and this one was a bore. Now, again, going back to Wikipedia, everyone agrees, apparently, that this was not the author's finest work. How do you pronounce his name? Hergé. apparently, even the Tintin fans, or especially the Tintin fans, acknowledge that this is really terrible, and that the author refined his craft as he continued. So, for that reason, I'm not going to stop reading these books yet. I'm going to continue reading Tintin and see if it gets better as we go through the next few books. And that apparently is one of the reasons it's in black and white, is because even after the author was given the opportunity to colorize it, like apparently he went back and colorized a lot of his other early work. But this one he said, no, there's no need. It doesn't need to be colorized and republished. The author just said, you don't need to republish this one. And this one was not worth republishing. So the author himself acknowledged just how terrible this was and how far he had come. Now, mind you, I'm taking it on faith that the books will get better, because I don't know yet. I'm just going by what seems to be the critical consensus as reported by Wikipedia. According to Wikipedia, the Tintin books are famous for their plotting and for their settings and for their kind of period detail. Well, no, not period detail. Their detail from geographic locations. I guess the author would research the different places that Tintin went to. But in this case, his research on the Soviet Union was very minimal. And he was also operating on a format where he had to end on some sort of joke or cliffhanger, I guess, at the end of every couple pages. Which, I guess accounts for how random and bizarre it is, with Tintin just going from one random danger to the next random danger. And of course, I guess you have to keep in mind it's written for kids. So, And what else is there to say? There was a whole bunch of more information on Wikipedia about this. But you can check that out for yourself, I guess. I'll try and remember to link to the Wikipedia article in the description at the bottom of this video. And if I forget, just you know how to work through Wikipedia. So that was Tintin in the Land of the Soviets. Now, book 2 here, Tintin in the Land of the Congo. Sorry, Tintin in the Congo. I already checked. My library doesn't have it. And according to Wikipedia, they're not publishing it anymore, because apparently it has a number of sins. Portrays the Belgium colonization of the Congo as a benevolent thing. And again, Tintin was published in Belgium. Portrays the Africans in racist ways, and also glorifies big game hunting. So the next one looks like Tintin in America, which I think my library actually has. Assuming nobody's checked it out since I last looked at the shelves. So I'm going to be trying to work my way through these and be giving my thoughts on them as I go.